All right, well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the globe today. Thank you so much for either watching this recording or joining us live. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the director of the fellowship using the Science of Engagement here at the University of Texas at Austin. And we're going to spend a little bit of time together this morning, or as I said, whenever, talking through our program. And we want to spend some time talking through one of our particular practices that we work with teachers from across the United States and Europe at this point as well. But I'm joined by two very special people on the call today. You'll be hearing from them, but want to give them a chance just to wave and say hi real quick. Miss Catherine Yonda, she's our Fuse Partnership Coordinator. Say hello to Catherine. She's going to be helping us out today. She'll be dropping some links in the chat wherever you're watching. You might be watching on LinkedIn or on Substack, potentially on YouTube as well. I know we're live there. But as we talk about different elements of our fellowship and how you might want to join or learn more, she'll be monitoring the chat, putting questions in there. So feel free to ask questions in whichever platform you're watching. You can put them in the chat and we'll answer them here. That'll be a great place to communicate with us and with each other. And the other person joining us today is Ms. Christian Langford. Give us a wave, Christian. She's one of our wonderful Fuse facilitators. And she works directly with all the teachers in our fellowship throughout their experience, brings a lot of knowledge, background, history as a teacher into our fellowship. And I'm really excited she's here with us today. We're going to be talking a little bit after I give just some basic background of some of our science and everything about one of our practices, as I mentioned. And if you've joined us before in one of our monthly sessions, we're going to be starting to do them a little differently. So in the past, we've kind of done the same thing each month and just given you an overview of the program and talked about one practice. We're going to revamp that this year. So each month, we're going to take a deep dive into one of our particular library of practice modules that teachers learn throughout the fellowship. So we want to make it new and interesting and really provide some value every month. We'll always still talk about how you can sign up, how you can join, and some of the basic background of the fellowship, but we also want to spend a little bit more time on particular practices so you get a good idea of what teachers actually engage with. So I'm going to start off with some of the background info, and then give a chance to hear again from Christian and from others throughout the team. So as I mentioned, so we are the fellowship using the Science of Engagement here at the we're a partnership really with the University of Texas at Austin and classroom teachers across the United States and Europe. We started off very heavily in Texas, but over the last couple of years, we've expanded to now we're working with districts in Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York, California, as well as some American schools, international schools in Portugal, and hopefully some others as well. So if you're one of our international schools or independent schools that are watching today, please know that we are excited to be expanding our footprint as well and building some connections across teachers across the world within our work. A little background on just kind of the origin story of where Fuse has come from. So really it's a collaboration between several folks as well as some departments here at UT, as well as at Stanford and other universities as well. So our main lead scientific investigator for our program, based a lot of the practices that your teachers learn is based on his work and research over the years. That's Dr. David Yeager. He works directly with the teachers in the fellowship. He's a professor of psychology here at University of Texas, has done tons of different projects and research across the country on working with adolescents and also more recently working with the adults that are working with those adolescents. So thinking through as adults how we can frame our language, think about mindset, think about the environments that we're creating for the young people in our lives, whether they're our own children, whether they're our students, whether they're in the workplace, younger people who are in our sphere of influence. And he came out with a book about a year ago called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. So if you have that book or you've read it, much of what teachers experience throughout Fuse is what he writes about and the research that he shares in that book. And what we've done is taken that and put them into a fellowship model that are very specific to how some of those shifts in our language and how some of the ways that we can better work with the adolescents in our lives to keep them more engaged. And then Dr. Carol Dweck is a key member of our team as well. You may know her from the book Mindset. Dr. Yeager was one of her lead grad students at Stanford. Ran a lot of the experiments for Dr. Dweck to put that book together, and they've collaborated over the years as well to not only take their work around growth mindset, but really extending that into thinking about stress as enhancing mindsets and synergistic mindsets and different ways that we can continue to improve the lives of the young people in our lives. And Dr. Uri Treisman, so he's a professor here at University of Texas as well, famous calculus teacher, MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner. Really most well known for how we have collaborated with him is his ability to take students from across the state of Texas who come from very different backgrounds, very different experiences with calculus and with other potentially, anxiety or stress producing courses, and creating an environment in his introduction classes where the level of rigor remains extremely high, but the level of support that students feel and they perceive as being there for them matches that high level of standard. So we've taken a lot of his work and the way he talks about tests, talks about assessments, talks about grades, talks about struggle, and is able to keep that expectation super high and is able to create that environment where students feel just as supported. And then we have a very tight partnership with the On-Ramps program. If you're watching from Texas, you may be familiar with On-Ramps. It's a dual enrollment program where students earn college credit as well as high school credit at the same time. The curriculum and everything is created by UT professors. The UT professors grade the exams, and then the public school teachers work with them to deliver that content and teach those students in high schools across the state. And what we did with our original partnership with On-Ramps is we identified some of the outliers and the real bright spots amongst about 1,700 On-Ramps teachers who were outperforming, their students were outperforming their peers on their campuses. And we brought them all together and really dove in deep with them and say, how are you talking about tests? How are you getting students to come in for tutoring or do retakes when maybe some other teachers who are teaching the same content are not able to get that level of engagement from their students? So really, the just to wrap up kind of who we are, where we come from, is backed by decades of research, both in the classroom level as well as university, and then bringing in folks like myself who have a lot of public school leadership experience, and thinking through how can we take this knowledge, this content, and really package it in a way that teachers can experience it and then implement it with students in their class. Fuse is not a pedagogical curriculum in the sense that we don't promote a certain way to teach math or science or CTE or anything like that. We're very much coming from the mindset that if we can help adults improve the way that they create an environment of trust and belonging and status and respect about instruction and about pedagogy, then students are going to be much more likely to stay engaged with their teachers, raise their hand and ask for help, come in for tutoring, want to do that retest, not see making a mistake as some kind of character flaw on their part, but rather seeing that mistake, seeing that difficult thing they're about to see as a challenge rather than a threat. So that's what we're going to spend some of our time talking about today. I'm going to give some of the background on the research, then Christian and I are going to talk about that practice. But we enter this really trying to solve this adolescent predicament that Dr. Yeager, teaches in his class here at UT, and then we work with our teachers in the fellowship program to also better understand and get an idea that, adolescence is an interesting part of development, right? And as the adult, too often, like our culture and our way of thinking about adolescence is like, if we can just get them through those years, then they'll be ready to be adults. Let's put them in a corner and just try to get them to make it through until they're 25. When really there are things happening biologically, and there's things happening within our young people that are really priming them to be able to seek challenge and seek status and respect during that portion of pubertal development that might not be as beneficial later on. And we need to take advantage of this point in life. And this predicament that we talk about is when you're going through puberty, when you have testosterone shooting high for boys and girls, for everybody, every day a young person is entering your classroom, that's the day they've had the most testosterone they've ever had in their entire lives. And then tomorrow when they're back the next day, that'll be the day when they've had the most testosterone in their entire lives. And what that does to us internally is it innately makes us want to seek status, right? We want to prove our value, prove our worth, If you have teenagers or you have students in your classroom, you know that the way they are seen by others and the way that they feel, whether they're respected or not by others, is high, is as high on their list of needs as could possibly be. And at the same time, though, that's a point in life where you don't want to feel diminished or feel disrespected or feel like somebody doesn't is misinterpreting maybe some of your responses, some of your action. A feeling that my teacher is disappointed in me that I made this mistake on this math exam, not because I know math is difficult and it's hard and mistakes is part of it, but she doesn't think I was paying attention, or she doesn't think that I, was putting in the work that I needed to get that done. And whatever the truth may be, we talk about throughout Fuse is all we can tap into how we frame our language so we can create that perception that that level of status and respect is there for our students. So 100 years of developmental science of adolescence, essentially in one slide. And if anything can kind of sum up what we're about, is helping teachers get a better understanding that teenagers' brains and hormones make them hypersensitive, as I mentioned, about status, how they look to others, how they feel about themselves. And this sensitivity enhances that fear of failure, in classrooms and beyond. Not only are we, seeking to kind of prove who we are, how we contribute, what our place is, but also, that fear of failure is right there more so than anything. If you've ever, if you can think back to when you were maybe in high school and went to ask somebody out on a date for the first time, or tried to maybe hold somebody's hand for the first time, and if that was reciprocated, I can remember that. I'm sure you maybe remember that moment, when you felt validated and you felt like you put yourself out there and somebody responded in the way that you were hoping. But at the same time, you probably remember that if it happened to you, that moment when you did take that chance, or you did maybe raise your hand to ask for help in a class, and the response that you got made you feel diminished, or made you feel, that, I took this chance. And whether the intention on part of the adult or your peer was to disrespect you, you felt disrespected. And that probably burned in your memory as well. So we want to find ways that we can take advantage of that moment, and make it more likely that our young people will feel respected, make it more likely they'll raise their hand again that next time, or come in for that second attempt on an exam or anything like that. But like I said, it's not all bad. It's part of human development. Once you're, starting puberty and you're starting to kind of have some more responsibility and have different ways that you are expected to contribute, that's why they're doing that. That's why they're, taking those risks, taking those challenges, because the older you get, the more society expects that you are a contributor, that you're adding more value maybe than you're taking away. So that's part of the natural growth. And with this understanding, we can help think about ways that we can harness that sensitivity and actually use it to our advantage, promote deeper engagement and deeper learning. So I'm not going to read all these to you, but I'll share these slides afterwards. I want to make sure that you just have access to some of the science behind what we're talking about. Like, as I mentioned, this surprising and really wonderful effect of adolescent hormones. We don't often think of the adolescent hormones as having a wonderful effect. But when it comes to learning and development, it really is a wonderful effect. It's that spike in testosterone, in adolescence, regardless of gender, that drives adolescents' hypersensitivity, to signs of social status and respect, like I mentioned. Signs of respect from teachers help adolescents feel that they're on track, towards becoming adults. And this feeling of respect is highly rewarding to them. We know that hypersensitivity is there. So oftentimes as adults, because we have more life experience and we have more, time on earth where good things have happened and bad things have happened, that maybe we're not as sensitive to maybe a completely innocuous interaction, that we may not have intended to come off as disrespectful, and we wouldn't think twice about it. But with a teenager, they're internalizing that message. And oftentimes, because of past experiences, they're internalizing it in a negative way. So when we say things like, oh, you learned this last year, or you should know this already, or I taught this already, that is probably not trying to be disrespectful, if I'm the teacher saying those things or doing those things. But anytime that we can avoid saying things that can be misinterpreted as a character flaw and can be correctly interpreted as we intend, as maybe helping them remember something they learned before, or not trying to make them feel disrespected, then we can flip that and make sure that we're not creating those misinterpretations from the young people in our lives. But like I said, it's an opportunity. From day one, in our fellowship, we're talking to our teachers about, how thinking, like changing the way we think about adolescent development, and thinking about this as something we as adults can take advantage of, in the sense that we have a common goal with our students. We want them to try hard things, seek challenge, not be nervous about making a mistake. So we want to take advantage of that, and just some small tweaks in our language can help turn that into such a powerful tool that we can use to our disposal, consistently as the adults. So we talk a lot in Fuse about making little tweaks about how you talk about grades, how you talk about assessments. So just minor changes that we can practice, and even if it doesn't come natural, that we can test out and see what kind of response we get from our young people. Then we can have a great benefit from that. And we talk a lot about math. Like most of the teachers in our program are math teachers, but we do have CTE and science and English teachers. We have plenty of different types as well. But anytime and this is through researching and surveying close to 10,000 students from across the United States, that anytime like a young person or a student suspects that their teacher doesn't think they have that potential to learn and improve, they may conclude that their teacher doesn't see them as worthwhile investment of time and energy to teach. So like I said, oftentimes you ask those same teachers in that same classroom, do you see your students having the potential to learn and improve? And they say, yes, of course. I believe that. That's why I'm in this profession. I want them to, I believe I have a growth mindset. I believe that all my students can be successful. But sometimes the language that we're using as adults is not being interpreted, in that way. So let's flip that and make sure that that message that we're trying to convey is getting and landing the way that we hope it will land. And if you've read Dr. Yeager's book, he goes into a lot of depth and detail about each of those things, and even more about that science as well. Just teacher testimonial, about thinking that idea of framing challenge as a desirable part, of the learning process rather than something to be challenged. We're going to be talking a little bit about how we praise something that's courageous, like asking for help, versus a more of a low level, praise. But really talking about like how we're framing challenge, how we're making it as something that, is something that we honor and respect, continuously throughout that process. So you'll get these slides. I'm not going to read all this to you because I want us to be able to have a lot of time to dive into one of the practices that we're going to talk about today. But finally, before I do that, like the one thing we do know definitely is that just grown-splaining or over-intellectualizing doesn't work. It doesn't work with our fellow adults. Certainly doesn't work with the teenagers in our lives. So rather than just trying to intellectualize and explain, overly explain, why it's important to try to do something difficult in a math classroom or a science classroom, is not going to have the same effect as really thinking through, how can I tap into that status and respect that I know my young people are internally seeking, and stop interfering in that adolescent development and really starting to harness it. So what we're going to do now is spend some time talking through just a couple of, or really just one main practice for today. So throughout Fuse, so Fuse is the fellowship. You've got about 200 teachers every year that join from, like I said, across the country. I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the details of what that looks like. But they learn multiple practices throughout their fellowship experience with us. And they're all really structured into two main buckets. So there's 10 practices over 2 years for teachers that do both. And they're structured into a way of thinking about the engaged brain, making it more likely that students will be able to recall information, a lot of the science of learning, but not only just the science of learning, but how we're explaining and being transparent with our students about that science. When we spiral content, in a math classroom or any classroom really, how are we telling our students why we're bringing back those same concepts that we maybe taught last week or 2 weeks before? We're doing it because we want to tap into their ability to retrieve knowledge and bring it back and how the brain works. And that's why it's important to bring it back. But if we're not being transparent about why we're doing it, that's often misinterpreted as, well, my teacher thought I wasn't paying attention last time. And so anytime, like I said, anytime it moves from a natural part of learning something new is making mistakes to potentially a character flaw, then we're going to have a disconnect. And then the other 5 practices are really all built around this culture of learning. How are we communicating our beliefs and values about learning in the classroom? How are we communicating our beliefs and values about how we view young people, and how we view how they learn a difficult content or difficult subject? And then how is our communication around that connected and aligned with our policies and practices? So are we saying on one hand that making mistakes is a natural part, of the learning process, but then I'm communicating my retesting or revision policy and it's like a one and done, or you can't improve your grade? So there's a disconnect there. So we don't promote like a certain policy or practice, but we do help teachers and think through, is the way I'm explaining, what I believe in alignment, with my policies and practices? Because one thing we know for sure is that if there's any hint of hypocrisy, what we're talking when we're talking to middle schoolers and high schoolers, then they're going to see that and they're going to oftentimes assume, a negative. So we need to be super open and transparent and aligned, in our communication about that culture of learning in our classroom. So the 10 practices that teachers learn, they're all right here. If you go onto our website, we've got little snippets of each one as well. Reframing mistakes to optimizing memory and coding. These are each kind of what make up the curriculum of Fuse. So each month over the next 10 months, we're going to take one of these and we're going to go into a little bit more depth. Obviously not as much depth as teachers will get in the fellowship itself, but do want to spend some time talking about each one. And the one we're going to talk about today is called Mining for Mistakes, a collaborative troubleshooting routine. And that is an extension to a practice that teachers start off the summer with. So teachers start the summer with the reframing mistakes practice, which is more like, how am I talking about mistakes in my class in general to make it more likely that they won't be viewed as I'm disappointed, in you, or I think you weren't paying attention, or you should be trying harder. And then now mining for mistakes is when we've made that shift in our overall communication about mistakes to now I've got an environment where students are raising their hand, they are asking for help. And now maybe I've got a student or a small group, at a kidney table in the back. And how can I work with them, through a difficult problem or through a mistake that they've made in a way that's not going to disengage them in that moment and continue to tap into that innate need for status and respect that we know they have. So this routine, that we're going to talk, Christian and I are going to talk a little bit about it today. She's one of our, as I mentioned, facilitators that'll actually be leading this practice next week when we have our teachers together for their fall virtual conference. So the way that we break it up into kind of portions is it's really a three-step process. So imagine yourself, sitting at a table with a small group of students or one-on-one with a student that they've raised their hand, or you've asked them to come back and look at a question that they've maybe missed on an assignment. And this is a routine that we teach teachers, and they practice it, and they practice it with each other, and they practice it with their students. They report back, they get coaching on, how is this going? What things are you noticing? And Christian and I are going to talk a little bit about it today. And then if you've got any questions about it as we go, put them in the chats, or we'll follow up afterwards as well. But really, step one is surfacing that student thinking, and thinking through how can we, without answering the question for them or just giving them the answer, get them to elevate their thought process behind what they were thinking when they started in the beginning. And what we always start teachers with is how do you enter that conversation? How do you enter it in a way that's going to make somebody perk up and have maybe the most charitable idea of why my teacher is wanting to work on this with me, versus maybe a negative response is like, oh, I got this one wrong again. My teacher's just going to, tell me what to do. They're disappointed in me. And we start off with, thanking our students for having the courage to examine their mistake. And it's very specific kind of language that we choose here to work with folks. Is we want to tap into that need for status and respect. And if we're praising like a low status behavior, like asking for help, like this might come up in like your typical like compliment sandwich approach that a lot of folks take, is that I'm going to start with a positive, I'm going to add what I really want to say in the middle, and I'm going to end with a positive. So like, thank you for asking for help. You did all this wrong. I'm going to help you get through it. but you wrote real neat. Your penmanship was wonderful, or you had all the numbers in the line or anything like that. So we want to move past that. So even in that entry point, if we can tap into that, does take courage. It does take a lot of guts, to ask for help, especially in a classroom in front of your peers, especially in a classroom where maybe you already feel like maybe you are surprised you're in this accelerated math classroom, and now you're going to ask for help, and you think you're the only one that doesn't need help. And if you're willing to engage with the teacher to get that help, then that takes guts, that takes courage, that takes a lot of maturity. So thinking of ways to enter that conversation with that in mind. And Christian and I are just going to kind of just talk through these slides. I want to keep it kind of informal. So I don't know, Christian, do you have any thoughts on when you are working with students or anybody about that entry point, into that maybe difficult conversation?
Yeah, I just know that students are going to be able to tell if you're being genuine or not. This is something that's a little bit different for a lot of teachers. So it does take practice when you're doing this. Because a lot of times teachers are going to say, okay, well, I want to go ahead and, thank you for raising your hand, or thank you for asking for help. But we really want them to understand, like Ryan was just saying, like how big of a deal it is to actually put yourself out there. And we want other students to see that and also join in with that other student with them asking for help. But along with this, we just got to be really, really clear that, every mistake is unique and they all should be approached differently. And so with surfacing student thinking, we're trying to get to the bottom of, what was actually going through that student's mind when they went through the process, because we are so excited just to see students actually try problems, because of course, we all know there are students that won't even attempt, but we want to get to the bottom of the fact that this student was brave enough to put themselves out there. They showed all this work, but now let's get to the nitty gritty of, what was behind the student thinking. So yeah, I love this step of it, just the getting started. And right here, don't assume anything. Whenever your student is coming to you and the student is having a question, we don't want to go ahead and jump the gun and say like, oh, well, I know why you did this. Here's what you did wrong. This is the next step. We really want to get the student to understand that, the learning is in their hands, not us feeding anything into them. So I think that's really key when it comes to
students. Yeah, I see that even with my own, my sons. So I've got 2 teenage sons. And even if I know like why they did, and outside the classrooms, even if I know like why they did something wrong, like if they get a hint that like I'm making an assumption, then it's like you've lost the thread like from the beginning. So we never promote or propose that any of these changes in languages are easy, because we as the adults have built up this routine ourselves, over the years of maybe sometimes, especially when you get a lot of experience and you know exactly what they did wrong. But the value of letting them tell you and them knowing that they just need to know that you're not assuming, and by them knowing that, it's not going to kind of turn them off right from the beginning. And that genuine go ahead.
No, I've been in a situation, just to put it out there, of assuming, and when you get the assumption incorrectly, and then that student says, no, that's not why I did that, or this is what I had to do a lot of like rebuilding, because that student in that situation probably felt like they weren't being heard, and I wasn't genuinely asking questions to get their answer, but I was jumping the gun. And we got to stay away from that, because when it does happen, it really hurts both parties.
Yeah. And the other piece, is that, think of how we structure our entry point in the conversation. That makes it clear that we're entering it without presuppositions. We're not entering it in any kind of assumption, either on maybe what they did wrong, even if we have an idea. And then also not under the presupposition that they were looking at their phone, during class, or they were, staring out the window, or whatever that might be. So as much like we work with teachers and a lot in the program about like, how can you take that step back and enter it into noticing that maybe you're thinking these things, but how do you keep them from coming out? And being super transparent, that the reason we're having this conversation, is that I want to know more about what you are are thinking and what you're, and that maybe don't say like, what were you thinking? Because that could be, perceived maybe negatively, but being clear in the beginning that I am curious, like I am wondering, I'm using notice and wonderings, that I know a lot of teachers use that framing as well. But we always like to share just like a sample, as well. So this came from one of our modules, and one of our teachers, as an entry point into the conversation. And obviously everybody would frame this, in their own language. You don't want to sound like you're reading from a script, but the idea that I'm not going to explain things you already understand, because that's not respectful of you or your time. So right off the bat, we're telling the student that I respect your time. I'm not going to go over something that obviously you've already done, here correctly. So that's why I'm going to ask you a few questions to understand how you were thinking about the problem, so we can troubleshoot the answer together. So totally transparent. The only reason we're having this conversation is that I want to better understand. It's about me better understanding you. It's not about you better understanding me. So anytime we can flip that idea is going to tap in. Remember, it's always coming back to that tapping into status and respect. So in our adult to adult conversations, entering into those with seeking to understand, that's a Covey thing, seeking to understand before being understood. So we want to do the same thing with our young people, especially that entry point, into the conversation. All right. So Chris, you want to go on to the next one? So we've entered the conversation with a student. We've done it in a way that's open and transparent. We haven't made assumptions. We've told them exactly, what we're trying to accomplish. And now we want to seek as quickly as we can to validate, something that they did right.
Yes. And whenever it comes to students' work, just understand that a lot of this has been ingrained in students for so long, where if you don't have the correct answer, then the whole thing is incorrect. And with that fear, that's a lot of times why a lot of students that we have are choosing to do nothing at all on the paper. Because in their head, they're thinking like, if I can't get to the correct answer, why even bother? And this right here is something where we just got to break this cycle, because you're going to end up with students that are not very confident. You're going to end up with students that, like I said, they just don't want to try at all. So by going through the process of actually pinpointing what the students are doing correct and giving your students feedback on that, that's going to build their confidence and what they're going to want to in turn work more for you. So again, this is something that, when I was in school, I remember it, and I would struggle to get through some problems, the more difficult problems, because if I felt I couldn't get to the answer, then I didn't even want to show my work. So as teachers, and we go through when we teach this to our fellows and during our coaching sessions, but it's more than just saying that it's not all about the correct answer, but you got to kind of think about what are we doing in our classrooms in order to validate the correctness on the page. So it could be something as simple as, from the start of the school year, you explain this, that, the right answer isn't the only thing that I'm looking for. And on assignments, there is feedback given, or there are points given for the steps that they are actually doing on their work, so they can actually see that and also believe it. We just want to get to the point where we can give them that praise, so they understand okay, I know this much of it. Or a lot of times the students know 75% of the whole problem, or they did take the time to go through the problem. They understand it's incorrect, but it's just a computation error. And we don't want that to be that little negative, that little something in the problem. We don't want that to be the reason where the next time that they see the problem, they're not even going to try, because there's that big red X on the page.
Yeah, one of the first activities we do in the summer, in our summer conference, we call it the pine tree problem. But essentially, it's a math problem that all the teachers in the fellowship, whether they're a math teacher or not, they work on together. And there's different levels of correctness, to that problem, at the end of the time they're together. But the big takeaway, and what we hear also from students when we, talk to them, like young students in the classrooms as well, is that whole idea that there's levels of correctness can so shift somebody's mind of how they view themselves as a math learner or anything that's difficult. Anytime we can move away from I was right or wrong, there's a huge difference in knowing you were 80% correct than if you were 10% correct. And our whole goal is to keep everybody, engaged and coming back and entering into that conversation and working with their teacher. So if you know that you were 80% right, like you are so much more likely, to seek out, that help for that last 20%. But if you never knew you were only 80% right, and you made that assumption that, well, I got it wrong, so I must, not know how to do this at all, then the likelihood, that you're going to stay engaged is so much more diminished at that point. And one question we always get about this portion of it, because really our goal with this second step, is to, as quickly as you can, notice and validate something they did right? Because that's going to continue the conversation. It's even any like we're talking about in a math classroom right now, but it's really any conversation you have with anybody. The sooner you can find some kind of success, or some kind of celebration, for maybe not the right word, but something close to that, the more likely they're going to stay engaged with you. But we always get the question, well, what if they don't have anything on their paper? So we know in class, a lot of times students don't even start. So we talked a little bit about this. So I think anything you want to share on this one, Christian? I think it's kind of similar to what we've been talking about.
Yeah, just explaining, like, I see what you did there. I understand, or I can see how you, like on the first one, divided both sides by 3. But it's kind of like walking them through the correct steps. And then you come up to, the issue, but they heard everything that was positive about what they did do, rather than them coming up to your desk and you're like, oh, this is incorrect right here. And then, they're like, well, didn't you see all the good stuff that I've done already? One thing I also wanted to add, I knew before doing Fuse, so when I was in the classroom, I saw evidence of this step right here and the importance of it, because I would have students that were comfortable enough to come up and ask me for help. But what I saw every time was when they would come to ask me for help, the problem was completely erased. So the bulk of the work that they had done that they felt was incorrect, they came up, but I can tell that they erased every single thing. And I could see through, and I'm like, why did you erase all this? All this right here is correct. But again, it's that fear. They didn't even want to present that to me, but I knew I had to make some adjustments. Thank you, Fuse. So I can actually validate that. So they would keep that part on their paper. So they weren't afraid of showing me the work that they had already progressed through.
Yeah. So here's where I was going, with, what about the students that don't have anything down there and anything on their paper? Maybe they erased it, like Christian was just talking about, or maybe they didn't even start. And we get this question a lot. And really the takeaway that we want to get to is that's fine. And the first thing we want to get to is still the same as if they would have written down, tons of work. The purpose of this step in the practice is to get them talking and get them validating something that they've done correctly. So if some ideas that we share with our teachers, if you do have that scenario, and they've got nothing on their paper, they don't know how to start, you're there with them now. You've done the hard work of getting them to either ask for help, or you've gone over there and said you're going to work with them, and they're at least sitting there and they're open to it. So you have them try the problem now and point out the parts that they have gotten right. So it's just getting anything down, with you there. And maybe you have some open-ended questions to get them to start with. But the scientific takeaway that we talk about with tapping into that innate need for status and respect is the same. So as long as it's something that that they have put in some effort towards, and maybe they wouldn't have done that without you there, you've got an in at that point. So you have them try working the problem right there, and then you're jumping right into validating, what they did, highlighting existing knowledge from what you're aware of from other problems they've tried. So they've probably done some other things, as well, that you can. Again, the goal is to get them talking, and get them engaged in a learning conversation, or previous concept, the student understands, and which one to build on. So again, always coming back to how we just want to get them in the conversation. So that's step 1 and step 2. So we're validating something they did right, but we do need to somehow make that shift, or we got to make that shift to get them to that new understanding, where we want to get them to. So that's our step 3, that bridge to a better understanding, which this is where what we hear from our teachers a lot of times is this is where it's like, you just have to hold yourself back, right? From
doing too much. the uncomfortable quiet that you have. And it's like, oh, I want to take the pain away. And let me just tell you what needs to happen. But we really have to refrain from doing that and getting the students to kind of take on that next step in their learning. Because a lot of times it just comes to asking the correct questions to your students, and it's continuing to build. So I guess the most important thing with this one is don't be afraid of the silence, because a lot of these students they're waiting for you to go ahead and tell them, because that's what all their other teachers have done. So we're breaking the mold right now, but this is where we're going to ask the correct questions. We're going to continue to build off of what they know, build off of the things that you've already told them and you validated for them within the problem, and get them to that next step without telling them, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And overcoming that compulsion to tell doesn't mean you're silent. It's staying in that zone of asking open-ended questions, with uptake. So it could be wait time. It could be silence, and you know your student best. If that's going to, maybe after 10 seconds they're gonna come up with something, or your student well enough that maybe if you're not prompting, then they're not going to respond at all. So it's not just sitting there and not saying anything, but it's leaning into this whole idea of collaboration with a leading question. So some examples, that, and these seem, when you talk about them or you see them on a slide in a webinar like this, you're like, yeah, this is, of course we would do this. This is easy. When we talk to teachers and they report back to us, about how they've tried some of these things, it's the kind of thing that, is learnable, but it takes practice and often doesn't come natural, to anybody, and to adults, especially when they're working with young people. So it's something that is a very learnable skill, and is something you can go and practice, and you can make mistakes on. But when you notice, that, maybe here's a moment when I could have had a better last question, to get them to come to that response, it's things we can continue to improve on. So a couple examples. So let's build off that great thinking you already did, with whatever problem you have right there. And then the key point that we always re-emphasize is we end our statement with a student with a leading question. So what would happen if you, or so if you know this part already, then what can you tell me about blank, or how might you do this, or how might this happen? So it's training yourself, to get into a routine of asking leading questions with uptake. And by with uptake means it's prompting a response. It's not a tell.
Yeah. And you just want them to continue to work. So that's why I really like what would happen if, because with that question, you can both go into it like, well, you might, as a teacher, you understand that if you do this, it's incorrect, but I want my student to try it. And just getting the student to understand that you can't break it. We just want you to keep working it different ways. And then by that process, just explaining to your student, like, I'm going to learn from you as long as you continue to keep writing on your paper. And you're going to learn from this as we continue to ask questions and discuss your next move. And I just wanted my students just to have the understanding in my classroom, my classroom culture. And this is what we want for all our fellows. We want for the students not to be afraid of taking that next step on the page, and just don't stop. Just try something new. And if it takes the teacher, if it takes you being the person to get the student to move forward, that's fine, whether it's in the incorrect direction, because the questions that you're going to ask are going to help your student draw it back in. But we just don't want the students in their head sitting there thinking, well, I don't know, therefore I won't do. And these 3 steps are the best way for you to be able to get your students to move forward without you as the teacher doing all the work, but for them to actually, it's a flowing process where at the end of it, they get to the answer that we're looking for with your help, but not you doing the whole thing.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And we'll put a link to our website and everything in the chats as well. But when we look at the data that we collect, from Fuse, really 2 of the things that we're most proud of is that students in Fuse teachers' classrooms, are showing great gains, on the actual their math performance. But then at the same time, we're also seeing teachers, and we survey teachers throughout the program, self-reporting, a much higher sense of well-being, and feeling much more engaged themselves, in their classroom and in their profession, and a much reduced desire to leave the profession or leave their current role. And our belief really is that it comes down to the teacher is going to be more satisfied, feel more valued, feel more in tuned when their students are responding to them in the way that they, in a instructional manner, talking about their mistakes, talking about their problems. And the students obviously are going to perform better because they're asking for help. They're doing those things. So it's a program that really can get those two benefits in one package. Better teacher well-being, better sense of self, better sense of happiness in a position, at the same time of students performing better. So moving away from only one right answer to that idea that I can tinker, with this problem that I'm trying to solve. Just to close up, just kind of this portion before I get into some of the nuts and bolts just about the fellowship, just for some basic tips, for that last piece in our 3-step process. Like I said, be patient, wait time's your friend, but something you can practice. Sometimes it is appropriate and it's the best thing you can do. Other times it's additional questions, open-ended questions with uptake. Signal that students should do the thinking, not you. And again, we got to tell them that. So if we just are know in our head, well, I'm not going to say that because I want you to do the thinking. We got to be transparent and tell them what we're doing. That I'm not going to give you this answer because I, believe in you. You can do things that are difficult. I have high standards. I know you can meet them. But oftentimes, if we're not transparent as to why we're doing what we're doing, then negative assumptions get built up. Clarifying questions. So we're not saying there's never a time to answer a question directly. Oftentimes in the process, we hear from teachers that, well, my students, ask me a specific question about how to do something, but it's coming from them. So yeah, of course, there you would answer directly, this is how you do this step or this process. So not being so, so open-ended that your young person feels frustrated when they're asking you a direct question. So you do want to be clear about those. And not being afraid to answer a question with a question, that keeps that conversation going. And then everything always comes back to like our opportunity, to tap into that adolescent's inner drive, for status and respect. So any last thoughts on the practice, Christian, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts about the fellowship?
No, I think we did a good job putting this all together. And I'm just letting you know the feedback we've gotten from teachers that have actually went step by step with this process. It's been pretty amazing. It's eye-opening for a lot of them. And it, like Ryan said, it just makes the classroom life a lot easier when the conversation is actually happening around math. And then there's less of just students not doing anything because this helps erase that fear of the mistake.
All right. Well, thank you, Christian. You can give us a wave. Thank you for being here with us. We'll see Christian again during our other webinars as well. But I'm going to wrap us up. Looks like we got about 12 minutes left. And I do want to spend just a little bit of time talking about just kind of what the fellowship looks like. If you want to join or you have teachers on your campus that want to join, we're in the process right now of enrolling teachers that would start. We're going to have a couple opportunities to start. One will be in the spring of 2026 and then another next summer. So we've currently got about 200 teachers in the program as we speak. And again, we're meeting with districts and teachers all over the place about joining for next year. Kind of the structure, what does it look like? So if you were going to join in the spring, you'd start with 2 virtual conference days. They're a little spread out, but you learn you get to talk from Dr. Yeager about all the science, about the practices. You do your first 3 practices during those initial sessions. If you're going to start next summer, then we're going to do and you're from Texas or you're close, or if you want to fly in, we're going to do a 2.5-day conference in person next summer. It's going to be June 17th through 19th. There again, you'll meet the other fellows in the program. You meet Christian, all the other facilitators. We do a great mix over a few days of group activities. You learn your first practices as part of the fellowship. set yourself up really for success that first part of the year. And then during the school year, we do 2 virtual conferences. So there's one in October and one in February. These are all virtual. After the summer, everything's virtual after that. But they're full day sessions. Again, a bunch of like workshops and group activities, additional practices, things like that. So those are like the main course of the fellowship. 2.5 days in the spring or summer, virtual or in person, and then 2 full days during the school year, all virtual during the school year. Just some shots of our previous conference. Just always good to see some smiling teachers from across the country learning together. Also, there's 4 coaching meetings that happen throughout the year. These happen outside the school day. They're about an hour long. They're pretty informal. We pick one of the practices that they've recently learned, teachers have recently learned and implemented. They come back, say how they're going. Again, we're very much like from the approach that, okay, you learn that collaborative troubleshooting routine. You're going to know the best time, place, context to implement that in your classroom. You're the expert of your classroom. So we don't have things like, okay, you got to do this 4 times by this date, things like that when it comes to the practices. So you come back, you let us know how it worked with your students, things you notice, questions you have, things like that. So 4 virtual coaching meetings throughout the year, give you a bunch of different options of what time to join, so it fits your schedule. The third tier, and I didn't talk a lot about this today, but we'll probably do another webinar where we talk specifically about the student modules. So to really cement kind of that perception of a culture of learning in the classroom, the students in each Fuse teacher's class do 3 student modules throughout the year. So what they are is essentially teaching the students in more student-friendly language, the same ideas around adolescent development, mindset, memory retrieval, science of learning that the teachers are learning. So they know what to expect when their teachers are talking to them about or using predictive language is one of our practices, or when they're talking about how they spiral content, or when they're doing their exam speeches. So the students can recognize kind of some of these changes their teachers are making. And then we ask the students some questions as well. So there is a survey that's part of it. And then the teachers get a report back on the perception of support and that culture of learning in their class. So teachers get reports 3 times a year as well. And again, the purpose of that is really to help move that culture in the classroom away from the idea of a culture of compliance, closer to a culture of learning. So just as one example, again, it's the perception. It's not like, I don't think any teacher, like if a student came up and maybe didn't do well on an assignment or something like that, would ever actually say, go try harder alone. But if that perception is there, that there's not supports in place, or they're not safe supports to use, or they're not respected, then that's the self-talk that a student might have. Trying to move that overall approach, that perception to, this is a place where we troubleshoot things collaboratively. I respect your time. I respect your value, as a learner, as a young person. So everything's about moving that perception from a culture of compliance to a culture of learning. Fuse teachers. So there is a cost involved with Fuse. Typically the district or the school pays for that. And if you are interested in learning more about potentially joining for next year, we'll meet individually. We'll talk through pricing, everything like that. But teachers in the fellowship do earn $1,000. So out of the tuition that either a school or a district pays, we pay that teacher back $1,000 as an honorarium for contributing to the fellowship, having their students do the practices, them completing the practices, sharing their thoughts and ideas about how things are working, helping us improve our overall delivery, for teachers across the world. So those are like the main kind of pieces of what teachers do. So they do the conferences, they get the coaching sessions, and then their students do the practices, and the teachers receive the reports. And that's kind of the main piece of the teacher experience. And I didn't mention the student modules. They take about 1 45-minute class period to complete. So that's 3 times out of the year. All right, so a few last things before we wrap up. So want to invite everybody that's watching, or you're getting this recording. A new thing we added this year is the Fuse Executive Leadership Series. We've already had one. If you go to our Substack, you can see the video and kind of a synopsis of that first one. Dr. Yeager gave a great talk on on using a lot of these same practices that teachers learn and infuse in a leadership sense, as an assistant principal or principal, department chair, department director, superintendent, anything like that. A lot of the practices and the framing of language that we work with our teachers on with their students are very applicable also with some slight tweaks for the adults that we're leading as well. And we have our next one actually coming up on November 12th. That's with Stephanie Okamoto. So we have special guests each time, folks that are from the same background, same ideas, but maybe are using practices similar to Fuse in different settings. So Steph is a leader with ServiceNow. That's a company that is growing rapidly, hiring a lot of new young employees. She has a lot of experience as a HR manager and others with firms like Microsoft and ServiceNow and others, and is really most well known for supporting new hires and younger employees who are new to maybe a leadership role or things like that. So we'll be posting different ways that you can sign up for that session as well. These are all free of charge for not only just Fuse districts, but anybody that wants to learn more about the science of engagement, different ways to implement it. You can register on our website, but we'll try to send that out to everybody as well. 2:00, November 12th. Love for everybody to join. Last couple plugs. I know a lot of you, it looks like, are watching this on Substack, so maybe you're already there, but we're going to start publishing a lot more content there. So if you haven't signed up yet or followed us, or I think subscribe to us there, please do so. Here's a link to it. You can snap that QR code as well. And then my last piece, I'm really, like I said, would love to talk with anybody that's interested in learning more about your teachers joining. This is a great time of year to have those initial conversations, because we definitely want to work with each partner, district, school individually to really think through, like, how are your current strategic goals, plans for supporting your teachers aligned with what they would learn in Fuse, or how maybe we need to tweak things a little bit to better align with your current goals and your current plans. I spent 20 years with Round Rock ISD here in Texas, and the last several years as a senior central office leader, and always appreciated different groups I was working with that would take kind of what my goals already were and align what we were going to partner with to those goals. So we definitely want to learn more about your work, learn more about how we can make sure that what we're doing is supporting the efforts that you already have in place. That QR code on the screen right there will take you to a place to schedule a meeting, but you can always go to our website. There's ways to connect with us there as well. You can chat to us on Substack or LinkedIn if you're watching there. I know there's a few of you there, or on YouTube. I think there might be a couple of you there as well. So anywhere you're watching this right now, you can make a comment, reach out, and we will schedule some time to chat. We would love for teachers from all around the place to join us next year, and this is a great time to start those conversations. And just the last slide, I think I've got about 90 seconds before we hit 12 o'clock. Just a quote, like I said, Dr. David Yeager is our lead scientific director here with the program in the Institute. Professor here at University of Texas at Austin. And really to sum up, Fuse was designed so teachers have a library of resources, a network of colleagues, and dedicated time to think carefully about how they would like to use this important science. So we provide the space for teachers to maybe take a step back and take a moment, and think through how what we're presenting could be best implemented in their context. Oftentimes we don't have that opportunity or that chance just to take a breath, take a step back, and think through how might I make a few tweaks, to my language that are going to have outsized returns when it comes to having students be more engaged with the learning in my classroom. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hope to hear from many of you. We'll be back next month with a different practice we'll talk about. We're going to be talking about engaging brains with prediction. So that's a little teaser for you for next month, but hopefully you sign up again, and we'll see you at that point. So have a great day, and thanks for joining us.